Dit is 3:30 op Maluti FM 97.1. Die program sand in die uurglas en ek is jou gasvrou Emaurans tot en met 4:00 vanmiddag. Wel, op die lyn het ek vir Dave Henderson van MYeBooks en hy gaan ons meer vertel van uitgewery en 'n goeie boek wat op die mark is. Dave, how are you today?
I have no complaints whatsoever.
How's the Cape? Good weather?
It's actually been crazy wind the past few days. It's the kind of weather where you're hanging on for dear life.
Oh, goodness.
And hoping that you and your loved ones don't blow away. But beautiful, like sunny skies aside from the killer wind.
Well, I tried to convince Dave to come down for the Cherry Festival this weekend, but he said it's a 14-hour drive. It's a bit too long, hey?
That is a long drive. That is at least like 4 Red Bulls.
Definitely. Now, Dave, I'm very excited for us to do the book, but first I want to ask you some questions. We talked last about the manuscript and that it must be in PDF form. So once it landed on your desk, what happens? Who edits it?
So, yeah, editing is typically one of the very first steps an author is faced with. An editor's job is basically to make a better book. The editor typically does want Microsoft Word, and so what that means is if your manuscript is in any other format than Microsoft Word, for example, if it was PDF, the editor is really going to struggle to do or work any magic with your words because it's a locked format you can't typically easily open. So an editor works word by word, depending on the level of edit. So the thing a lot of authors don't understand is that editing actually has different levels. It could be as simple as a proofread or a light edit, where you make sure the most simple things and spelling and grammar is taken care of. Or it could be a much deeper edit called a comprehensive or a line edit, where the editor actually asks the question, does your story make sense? Does it flow? Does it make sense? Have your facts been checked and things like that?
Now, Dave, I want to ask you, how important is a sales blurb for the back cover of the book?
Oh, it's very important. So picture the sales blurb as standing in a lift with a potential reader. And the reader says, hey, man, tell me about your book. And you've got like 30 seconds with this reader to tell them what your book's about. And that's how important the book is, because if you bore them in that 30 seconds, you've lost them. And the same way, if you bore a potential reader who is, browsing a bunch of other books as well, and if your blurb doesn't stand out, you've lost that reader. And the mistake that most authors make, especially self-publishing authors, is that they summarize a very bland story of their book. So my book is about this and this happens, and they give a sort of a blow-by-blow account of whatever might be happening. And it's not meant to be a summary, it's meant to be a sell.
Yes.
And so you don't sell the summary, what you sell is the benefits of reading the book, for example. So most authors make that mistake of summarizing.
Where does the term blurb come from?
It's interesting. I actually have no idea. But it does sound like a pretty cool word, though.
Definitely, we'll find out. Dave, I know it depends on the book, but would you recommend illustrations in a book?
Ooh, that is a very interesting topic. Okay, so certain books, you don't really have a choice. For example, a kid's book or a cookbook, you want to have pictures on the inside.
Yes, it makes it more enticing.
Yeah, it makes it engaging, and certain readers need to be engaged with desperately. So the younger the reader, the more you typically want to visually stimulate them, as well as have well-written content. And so things like a children's book, you absolutely want to work with colors, with shapes, with images, aside from just the plain text. And obviously for cookbooks and things like that, you have to have a photo to actually indicate what the readers are aiming to cook. Certain books do lend themselves to text only. And for example, if I'm telling you a story, sort of an adult story, not an adult, it sounds naughty, but if I'm telling you, if it's a fiction, if it's a novel, typically I don't necessarily need to have pictures there. And a lot of authors that I help, I do give the advice to actually remove things where the author might have initially gone for example, Microsoft clip art. A lot of authors stick pictures in because they feel they need to, and I do give those sorts of authors the advice to rather leave the images if they're actually doing more damage than good.
Dave, I think you're sometimes in a difficult position. If you give advice and they're a bit hesitant about it, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's a very cool conversation to have with an author because firstly, the author is very close to the material. So they've been working on this material sometimes for years. Now you step in and in a day or two say, listen, this cover that you've thought of doesn't work. The text, the way you had it, doesn't work. You're missing these important parts, for example. And often there's an element of trust. The author needs to trust that you've got the best intentions and the advice necessary to steer them in the right direction. There's also what makes it tricky as well is the fact that we are a self-publishing business. And so whatever solution we typically suggest, maybe it's an edit, maybe it's a new illustration, there is a paid-for answer to that problem. And so being a South African author, often you're very adverse to those sorts of costs. And so you want to avoid the edit to save money, or you want to avoid the picture because it costs money. And so what that also would result in is a substandard book. So it's a bit of a balancing act, but it's always meant to be an open conversation. Say, listen, it will cost more, it will make a better book, and it just depends on your goal for writing. Because if your goal was to make a commercial success, there's no real way to get around good advice. But if you said, listen, my goal is not necessarily to make the next bestseller, I just have a message I really want to share, then having the best quality cover, for example, is not necessarily the most important thing.
Dave, I want to ask you, how do you choose the perfect cover to represent your book? You obviously want it to stand out, you want the reader to, when they look at it, for the book to capture their attention. How do you get that right?
Yeah, so the art of graphic design, which is essentially what a cover design falls into, is it's a beautiful topic involving things like color palettes. So for example, your genre, maybe it's a fiction, maybe it's a romance, maybe it's religious, tends to have typical color palettes associated with that genre. So the first thing you want to find out is, for example, if you're doing romance, what colors do you tend to see on the best-selling books in that genre? You touch on another point now, which is you don't want a cluttered cover. So a lot of authors want to clutter the cover because everything they think is in the book, they feel needs to be on the cover as well, which is not the case. You want a simple cover that draws the reader's attention with a centerpiece or a central theme. And so actually you want something simpler, a simpler design. You want something that's typically a little obvious, because although it's frustrating for an author to go, yeah, it's a religious book, but does it have to have a cross? It's a very easy to recognize symbol that most readers will pick up very quickly. And so often you need to be a little obvious when it comes to colors or when it comes to the symbols or pictures you're going to use on your front, because the reader gives you a couple seconds of their attention before deciding to kind of move on. And so cover design, it needs to contrast well. It needs to be fairly obvious in terms of the style of text, the colors used, the pictures used. And I think the final thing I normally recommend is just it needs to contrast very well, because an ebook, you typically view at a very small size, for example, where a print book, you have the time to kind of pick up and look at closely. So for the smaller picture, you want colors and text that contrast beautifully at a small size as well.
Dave, now before we continue, we're going to speak about Michael Lee's new book. We're first going to take a music break, so I'll be back with you in a few seconds.
Let's do it.
Talking to Dave Henderson from MYeBooks. Now, Dave, there was a new book published by Michael Lee. Tell us all about it.
There absolutely was. So Michael J. Lee is a talented South African author who has written a beautiful series of books, the first of which is titled Passage to Faith. And so this is book one in a trilogy. And what Michael does in this book is he tries to marry faith with evidence and personal testimonies of people who've achieved great things in life and their ideas and thoughts on that topic. So he's released 3 titles. The first of which I can see is available not just digitally, but he's also got an audiobook out as well. So If you're thinking your readers might be interested, I can read from the sales blurb if that's okay.
I would love that. Thank you.
Okay, so the title of the book is Passage to Faith, Cosmic Evidence and Testimonies of God's Unseen Power. Passage to Faith explores current scientific evidence supporting the case for the existence of a creator God. It draws on dozens of historical testimonies of individuals who had encounters with a supreme being, which influenced them to change their lives and sometimes the world for the better. Taking the reader on an evidence-based tour through the cosmos, Lee, qualified in the fields of philosophy, of future studies, theology, literature, and education, reveals a stunning degree of indwelling intelligence and beauty on display throughout the universe and on Earth. He then traces the common ground between the creation account in Genesis, in the Bible, and cosmology, the Big Bang Theory, and Albert Einstein's theory of relativity. Lee discusses the faith of a wide range of people from different areas and disciplines to reinforce the conviction that God's redeeming power actively intervenes not just in nature, but in history. So that was an extract of Michael's blurb. And if there's time, I can delve into the first chapter. Is that okay?
It sounds so intriguing, Dave. I am going to ask you, please do.
Perfect. Okay, so chapter 1 is titled A Cry for Help. When 19-year-old David Yonggi Cho, an impoverished survivor of the Korean War, started coughing up blood, a doctor at a local hospital said he'd contracted a fast-spreading, incurable form of tuberculosis. He was told he had 3 to 4 months left to live. While under this medical death sentence, the frightened young man was visited by a schoolgirl who started sharing the gospel with him, later giving him her Bible. Raised as a Buddhist, but desperate to live, Yonggi Cho decided to give Christianity a go. Hardly able to breathe and still coughing up blood, he began reading God's Word. He described how he felt like a starving man who eats bread. He has testified that within 6 months he was completely cured of his disease. Yonggi Cho went on to enter the ministry and to establish the Yoido Full Gospel Church in Seoul, South Korea. The church grew rapidly to become, at one stage, the world's largest congregation, with over 800,000 members. God had delivered the young man from his health crisis, subsequently raising him to a position of power, influence, and success. During this time, South Korea itself rose from the ashes of civil war to become one of the Asian tigers of the world economy. God's power, which will be demonstrated in this book to rule over the entire realm of nature, often breaks decisively into human history and into the lives of individuals. The book's aim is to show how God can operate both in nature and in history. This is the modern story of a God who has built natural laws into the fabric of life and who can guide humanity on a journey of redemption and progress. We'll blend scientific evidence of a governed universe with personal testimonies to present a case for the existence of God's unseen power. And that's an extract of Michael's first chapter. What did you think?
I love it. No, I'm definitely going to buy it. That is amazing. Dave, it's available on Amazon.
It is absolutely available on Amazon. The author is Michael J. Lee. The book's title is Passage to Faith, A Cosmic Evidence and Testimonies of God's Unseen Power. And Michael is a very smart author who has an author website titled Michael, MICHAELJ, Lee, LEE.com, where you can find out everything you need to know about Michael, his books, and his other projects.
You know, Dave, I must be honest with you. When I received your email, with the book and the cover and everything, the cover is absolutely beautiful. You know, if I would walk into a bookshop, that's the first one that I will take off the shelf because it's so...
It catches your attention, right?
It does. No, I was really, really, I anticipated this so much, this afternoon to hear what it's all about and that, but it's Passage to Faith and it's written by...
That's exactly what a good cover design does.
Yeah.
Visually, it catches your attention, and it's also, it's obvious, what the books, it makes the content of the book that much more obvious.
No, it had me hooked. No. Oh,
I'm glad.
Dave, thank you so much for talking to us. And
It
you
was great
must
spending time with you guys again.
Yes, definitely. You must enjoy a cup of coffee, and we'll see you next week.
Great. Until next week.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, man.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Ons het dan gepraat met Dave Henderson van MYeBooks en hy het ons vertel van Michael Lee se nuwe boek Passage to Faith.